Over the last few years, Republicans all over the country have been attacking laws concerning child labor. Now, the effect, of course, is a lot of states have loosened child labor laws and has led to more children being harmed at work. Labor Department statistics released last week show that federal fines for violating child labor laws have raced upwards from just about $3.5 million during Trump's last year in office to more than $8 million in the fiscal year that ended September 30th. So that's just fines paid by companies for violating child labor. So that's what we know of right now, that we know of, and that has been fined for companies being caught. Think about all the companies that are using child labor right now that haven't been caught. New York Times reporter Hannah Dreier has been documenting how this tight labor market and a rise in the number of unaccompanied minors crossing the southern border has greatly increased the number of underage foreign workers that are working in dangerous jobs. Meatpacking plants, for one, they've been working overnight shifts and these dangerous jobs, and in many instances, doing both, which is a violation of federal law. Last month, Dreyer told the story of a 14-year-old Guatemalan immigrant named Marcos Cux, who, working the night shift at a Purdue Kitchen slaughterhouse on Virginia's Eastern Shore, actually ended up getting his left arm mutilated in machinery. That's horrifying. The slaughterhouse, of course, after the accident, had notified the Labor Department, and the agency ended up assigning a compliance officer. Now you would think, okay, well, compliance officer obviously comes in, says, oh, this is bad, we should fine the company, they're a violation, but also make sure that they clean up their act and not hire immigrants for children to work in these horrible conditions, right? Well, no, that's not what happened. The compliance officer actually said, oh, just go ahead and inspect yourself. And of course, the case was closed with no citations whatsoever. Now, of course, the slaughterhouse didn't tell the compliance officer the age of the worker. And of course, the compliance officer never asked, which you would think he was supposed to do. And by the end of the story, Cox was actually back working at that same plant. So we have an unsafe workplace that's staffed by immigrant child laborers, an accident, and yet absolutely no consequences, no citations, nothing whatsoever. They let them inspect themselves. Well, you know what happens when you let these companies inspect themselves or hold themselves accountable. We investigated ourselves. We found we did nothing wrong. Yay for us. We did great. And of course, the compliance officer was like, oh yeah, seems legit. Yep, taking you at your word. Only after the Times story was published did the Labor Department actually do a real investigation into this. So now look, one of the big issues here that might actually explain what happened, why this happens. And by the way, if it happened in one plant, probably happened at others, many others actually. And so what's the deal here? What's going on with this Department of Labor that seems to not be doing a very good job at stopping child labor in these slaughterhouses? Well, in the last 10 years following the Great Recession, funding for the two Labor Department agencies that did enforce child labor laws stayed completely flat. Only under Biden did the Wage and Hour Division and the Office of Solicitor receive modest funding increases. That is until this year, where Congress cut about $100 million from their combined budget request. Now, Congress, of course, look, the Republicans run the House of Representatives. They have the purse, so they'll put out a budget. And then, of course, Democrats have to, in the Senate, have to agree in order to pass a budget. And of course, they have to pass a budget or else the government shuts down. And so Republicans put out this request to cut $100 million from the combined budget request for these agencies that try to ensure that children are not put in these dangerous jobs, and because it's obvious that they are being put in these dangerous jobs, in these dangerous conditions, and are being harmed as a result. Now, in mid-September, Representative Dan Kildee, Democrat of Michigan, wrote then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and other congressional leaders urging him to pass Biden's supplemental funding request to add $100 million to enforce child labor laws. That letter was co-signed by 36 members of the House Child Labor Prevention Task Force that Kildee had created in July with Hillary Scholten, Democrat of Michigan. Now, notice that a lot of Democrats here that are creating task forces to prevent child labor. Are Republicans there? Are Republicans concerned about not only child labor, but remember, migrant labor as well? These are migrant children that are being employed by these companies. Remember, Republicans are like, well, we can't have all these migrants coming in and stealing American jobs, right? Well, what do you think is happening? I mean, they're not stealing jobs. You have these people, these companies that are actively hiring children. There's no theft going on here, except, I guess, wage theft from these workers and a theft of their childhood. How many Republicans, though, signed on to the letter? How many Republicans are part of the House Child Labor Prevention Task Force? None. Nada. Zero. In fact, rather than move to crack down on child labor, Guardian reporter, reporter who published a piece in The Guardian, Michael Sonato, noted how Republicans are actually introducing bills to loosen child labor laws. No fewer than 16 states have introduced such laws in the past 2 years at the instigation of the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is a right-wing, Koch-funded think tank based in Florida. Because, of course, 9 of these bills were actually signed into law. Have one here in Michigan, Iowa, Tennessee, Arkansas, with Governor Huckabee Sanders, of course, New Hampshire, and New Jersey. Michigan had actually passed 3 such laws, and Iowa had passed 2 of them. And now it's gone national. Pro-child labor bills are being introduced in Congress. For example, Representative Dusty Johnson of South Dakota introduced the Teenagers Earning Everyday Necessary Skills Act. This is co-sponsored by Republican Representative Troy Nehls, of course, Matt Rosendale of Montana, and Tracy Mann of Kansas. The bill would expand allowable working hours for teenagers aged 14 to 15 from 18 hours per week to 24 hours per week, and would let them work until 9 p.m. on school nights. Currently, they can only work until 7 p.m. during the school year. Meanwhile, Senator James Risch of Idaho introduced the Future Logging Careers Act, co-sponsored by Republican Senators Mike Crapo in Idaho, Suzanne Collins of Maine, Tim Scott of South Carolina, John Cornyn of Texas, and by independent Maine independent Angus King. The bill would reduce protections for children in logging families to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to participate in logging work, which, again, that's dangerous. It's dangerous work. Now, the legislation simply mirrors the same fair labor laws that already apply to farming communities. Scott Dane, director of the American Loggers Council, wrote in a letter last April to the Washington Post. Yes, we're going to trust the word of the American Loggers Council. I'm pretty sure that they're completely and utterly unbiased. Yes, and their opinion can be trusted to not favor industry over the health and well-being of children. Oh, God, that's a good one. All right. Look, according to the Government Accountability Office, more than half of all work-related deaths for children had occurred in, well, farming work, actually. So, agriculture. But if you think that's bad, it gets worse. Look, some Republicans have long proposed eliminating child labor laws altogether at the federal level. For example, in 2011, Utah Senator Mike Lee called federal child labor laws unconstitutional and had cited a Supreme Court decision back in from 1918, Hammer versus Dagenhart, that said that only states could regulate child labor. And of course, if we left that up to the states, then, well, who do you think would have child labor? Pretty much all the red states. but I'm guessing some of the blue ones too, to be fair. Because corporations, they love themselves some child labor. And there are reasons for that. Now, that said, here's the quote from Lee. This may sound harsh, but it was designed to be that way. Now, we got rid of child labor, notwithstanding this case, so the entire world did not implode as a result of that ruling. Well, here's the thing, though. History says otherwise. You see, it took federal laws to get rid of child labor. Specifically, the passage of the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. So, you know, there was child labor up until then. So, now, that said, the Fair Labor Standards Act would have been unconstitutional under the Hammer Standard, but thankfully when the FLSA was challenged in court, the Supreme Court in the United States v. Darby got rid of that, threw the Hammer Standard out, and said, no, we can't let the states decide whether or not we should work children. Okay, there should be a standard across the entire country saying, you know, how much child labor we should allow. Now, that said, for a while that was pretty uncontroversial, even among Republicans. Even back in 2011, most Republicans thought Lee's position on, hey, send the children back to the mines was a bit extreme, a bit fringe. But now things are changing, and things have changed. Republicans are fully on board in sending your kids back into the mines. Now, I think it's important to note, for those of you who might be like, well, it might be a good thing to have the children come, you know, go back to working, you know, getting some life skills. Remember, this is not something that they would ever send their children off to do. Are their children going to be working in the factories? Are their children going to be working in the slaughterhouses? No. No. See, that's for poor people only. And if you're wondering, by the way, how this could negatively affect you, remember, kids can get legally paid less than adults. Yes, that's right. Now, what does that do for adults? It pushes adults into accepting lower wages in order to get jobs, because now they're competing with children. You see how that works? Now, that also helps the companies, by the way, because they end up spending less on labor and can give more to their shareholders and CEOs. Their shareholders and CEOs, in turn, donate more to Republican politicians who loosen the child labor laws in the first place. At the end of the day, what Republicans are doing is trying to kill labor, trying to kill labor unions, trying to drive down wages, and harm workers. That's their goal at the end of the day, is to serve the wealthiest business owners and their donors by harming you and your kids.